Hi everyone. We're going to change speeds today and we're going to begin learning about something completely new. We're going to turn our focus towards Earth. And today we're going to start looking at Earth as a system. Should you need to get a hold of me if you have questions, my email address is on the screen. It's rcrawford@jcpsmail.org. Let's go ahead and hop in. So this idea that Earth is a system. I want to point out first off that we need to understand what a system is. And when we talk about a system, we just mean a group of related parts or objects that work together to form a whole. In other words, Earth is a bunch of pieces that work together to make Earth. So one of the things that we can look at is the different materials that Earth is made from. So we have, the majority of our planet, when we studied the solar system, we said that it was a rocky planet, a rocky metallic planet. We also have a lot of water on our planet. We know that our planet is surrounded by a, a thin layer of gases. And so all of these different parts are going to work together as a system. So Earth is a system. When we look at these parts of the Earth system, really we do want to look at um, those different types of things that Earth is made from, but we're going to use some prefixes to actually name the different parts of the system. So a prefix that means air is atmo. Okay, now that may remind some of you of atmosphere. So a prefix that means water is hydro. So whenever you see this word hydro or this prefix hydro, that usually means that it's something related to water. We have land or rock. We can use a prefix here called geo. And then life, we can use a prefix called bio. So anytime you see these prefixes, generally speaking, they're going to be related to these things. So let's take a look at these parts of the Earth system. So not surprisingly, those parts of the Earth system, there are 5 of them. We have the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, something called the geosphere, the biosphere, and the cryosphere. So the atmosphere is really just all of Earth's gases. Remember, atmo means air. The hydrosphere is all of Earth's liquid water. That turns out to be important. So all of Earth's liquid water, that's our hydrosphere. Remember, hydro means water. I want to look at cryosphere. So the cryosphere is all of Earth's frozen water, really meaning ice. I have seen, sometimes scientists will combine these two spheres because we're talking about the same. We're talking about the same substance, just in different states of matter. But I think it is important to split out the cryosphere. So the cryosphere is all of Earth's ice and snow. Then we have the geosphere, which here it says Earth's entire solid body, but I really prefer to think of it as all of Earth's rocks and minerals that would extend from the surface all the way down to its center. And finally, we have the biosphere. The biosphere is going to include everything that's alive. It's going to include you. It's going to include all the other animals and plants and microscopic bacteria. It's going to include things that live on land and, of course, things that live in the ocean. So the biosphere is really just all life on Earth. Okay, so these are the parts of the Earth system. And remember, all of these parts work together to form a whole. So one thing that is important for us to remember with any system, not just the Earth system, is that the different parts are interconnected. So we can have feedback between different parts of the system. And by that I mean, if I make a change here in the hydrosphere, that is absolutely going to impact the biosphere. So an example of that would be, let's suppose that I built a dam and kept water from going down off into another part of an ecosystem. That is absolutely going to affect the living things. Or if there were no rain, it was a drought, that's absolutely going to affect the biosphere. Um, Lots of different ways. So there's lots of feedbacks as we have matter and really energy moving between each part of this Earth system. And that does mean, though, remember, you make a change in one part and you are very likely to change other parts, whether intentional or unintentional, because these parts are all connected. So I mentioned that really this Earth system, one of the things we have to look at is matter and energy, and sort of how do matter and energy work and move through the Earth system. So first off, most of you have already know this. The sun, our sun, is the ultimate source of all energy here on Earth. So light energy from the sun is going to travel by radiation through empty space, and it's going to arrive here on our planet. Some of that light energy is converted to heat, and it warms our planet. Some of that light energy is used to uh, for by plants for photosynthesis. But all the energy on our sun on our planet is coming from the sun. Okay, and our sun is really what's going to power each one of these Earth systems. Now, one thing that I want to make clear is that even sometimes students are like, well, not all the energy in the sun or here on Earth is from the sun. Well, they'll think, I have energy in my body and I didn't get my energy from the sun. I just need you to keep in mind that, the energy that's inside of you right now that you use to move and to survive, that's energy that started out as light energy, but then plants took that energy and they converted it to chemical energy, and they converted that chemical energy and placed it inside of food molecules. And then through a food chain, those food molecules have made it to you. So yes, even the energy inside of you comes from the sun. So matter and energy operate very differently within the Earth system. Okay, and you're often going to hear people, or you're often going to hear scientists say, "Well, energy is going to flow through the Earth system, whereas matter is going to cycle within the Earth system." So energy flows through, whereas matter cycles within. Well, that sounds pretty easy, but what does it really mean? So if we think of all the energy coming from the sun, that energy is going to arrive at Earth, but then all of that energy is eventually going to leave Earth. So energy in equals energy out. That energy comes from space and it's going to return to space eventually. It does not stay. Matter, on the other hand, the matter we have here on Earth is going to cycle within. I want you to think of recycling. So, in other words, we're going to use some of the same molecules and atoms over and over and over again. Those water molecules, carbon atoms, oxygen atoms, those are going to be used within these systems over and over. They don't largely disappear from Earth and end up back out in space. So we say that matter cycles within the Earth system because it keeps getting recycled, but energy flows through. It arrives and then it eventually arrives from space and it eventually ends up back in space. So let's take a look at what I mean by sort of this cycling of matter within a system. And I just want to take a look at the water cycle because this is something we studied earlier this year. So I want you to sort of think about what we know about the water system. So we have energy from the sun that is going to cause water that is either on the surface or in oceans or lakes. It's going to cause it to evaporate. Okay, and so if it's evaporating, from the ocean in particular, we're of course talking about water moving from the hydrosphere. When it evaporates, we know that it turns into water vapor and it's going to end up in the atmosphere. See how we move some matter and some energy into another part of the Earth system? The water is then going to condense into clouds and it's going to fall as rain or any kind of precipitation. It could fall as snow back onto the geosphere, right? So it's going to travel across the geosphere. Remember, we talked about surface runoff, or it could seep down off into the geosphere and become groundwater. Now, of course, some of that water is going to be used by living things, right? By plants and by animals. So we can see that, the atmosphere, it returns it to the geosphere, and then it is also used by living things. It's also used in the biosphere. And if that that precipitation was snow, it would be frozen. So we could say it was part of the cryosphere. And eventually in the water cycle, it's all going to return back to the hydrosphere. And this is a really simple example of materials, of matter, molecules moving within that Earth system, it being cycled over and over and over. So lots of natural cycles that you know about are really part of this idea that matter cycles within. Some of you haven't heard of the carbon cycle, but carbon molecules do exactly the same thing. So carbon dioxide is going to move from the atmosphere down off into plants. They use it to make food during photosynthesis. And plants, after they make that food, they're going to store some of that carbon. So the actual tree trunk and the leaves are actually mostly made of carbon. When those plants die, we're going to have it moving. And by the way, this is atmosphere moving to biosphere. When those plants die and they're laying on top of the geosphere, they're going to begin to decompose, and that carbon is going to move back into the soil, back into the geosphere. This also happens out over water. We have carbon is able to get dissolved inside of the ocean. And so this is an example of carbon moving from the atmosphere into the hydrosphere. And so this happens over and over with lots of different types of matter. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I just want you to keep in mind that what we do has a huge impact on Earth and the Earth system. So one of the primary ways that we may be right now impacting the Earth system is something called climate change. So this is the idea that the climate here on Earth is changing very rapidly in some cases. And some of you may already know that this has been tied to using fossil fuels, things like oil and gasoline and propane, natural gas. All of these things create excess carbon dioxide. So we're really tinkering here when we burn and use these fossil fuels, we're tinkering with the carbon cycle. You may remember that when we tinker with one part of a system, we may impact other parts of the system. And so, as we add more carbon into the atmosphere when we burn it, we are absolutely making big changes in the hydrosphere. We're making changes in the geosphere. So our actions, human activity, has a huge impact on the Earth system. Guys, that's going to do it for today. We're going to continue to talk about Earth here in the coming days. I hope you have a great day.